I mentioned this last week, but Eid is coming up soon, and since so many of you loved the Egyptian cake video, I thought I would show off Maa'moul, another kind of Eid cookie. These ones are eaten throughout the Middle East by Muslims, Christians and Jews alike, and are usually made to celebrate religious festivals such as Eid, Easter and Hanukkah. Similar to Egyptian cake, these are also stuffed with nut or date fillings, but these are made with pure semolina instead of flour. I'll be showing you how to make the dough as well as 3 traditional fillings: dates, pistachios and spiced walnuts. Before we get started, I'm Obi and I want to get you cooking delicious Middle Eastern food at home. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see new weekly step-by-step Middle Eastern recipes. Now let's jump right in. So first thing we'll do is make the biscuit dough, as it will need to rest overnight. It's essentially just a few ingredients, but to make a great dough we'll need to clarify some butter. You can theoretically use other fats such as vegetable oil in place of clarified butter, but I haven't tried it personally. To do this, add 500 grams or 1 pound of butter to a pot on a medium-high heat and let it melt completely. When it's melted, turn the heat down to medium and let it cook for a few minutes until a light foam has formed over the surface of the butter. When that happens, pour your melted butter out into a jug and let it sit at room temperature for about half an hour. After half an hour, the milk solids in the butter will have sunk to the bottom and settled. The foam will have all floated to the top once more and formed a layer. Use a spoon to skim the surface of the butter until you remove all the foam, then discard it. Next, place another jug or bowl on your scale and weigh out 250 grams or half a pound of the clarified butter. Once you've weighed it, set it aside to cool completely until it reaches room temperature. Make sure not to tilt the jug with the clarified butter too much, as you may accidentally pour out the settled milk solids, and we just want the pure butter for this recipe. The white liquid in the bottom of the jug are the milk solids we want to avoid. Unlike most biscuits, Maa'moul aren't made with flour, but rather semolina. Semolina is a kind of flour used in making pasta and many other Middle Eastern desserts. It's more grainy than standard flour, and it's common to find both coarse and fine semolina. For the Maa'moul you definitely want to use fine semolina, although some people use a mix of both coarse and fine. Coarse semolina is usually used in puddings and more moist desserts. Using only coarse in these biscuits would leave them a bit too dry. Add 500 grams or 1 pound of fine semolina to a large mixing bowl. Next, you'll add 1 tablespoon of mahlab powder to the semolina, which is a spice made from the seeds of cherries. It's got a slight cherry and almond flavour that lends itself well to the mild flavour of these biscuits. Mix together until well combined, and then once thoroughly mixed, add all your clarified butter to the mixing bowl. Get in there with your hands and mix it all together. You could do this in a mixer, but it really isn't required for this. At first, it will feel a bit wet, but keep scooping the semolina and clarified butter from the bottom of the bowl and it will start to come together. Once it starts to clump up into pieces, you want to grab handfuls of semolina and rub them together in your palms. After about 5 minutes of rubbing the semolina together, you should reach a single uniform yellow colour. This is a sign that the butter has been evenly distributed. Make sure there are no stray spots of dry semolina in the bottom of the bowl and then cover with some plastic wrap. You need to leave the semolina to rest and hydrate overnight. The next day, your semolina will have clumped up and solidified a bit. To get it workable again, start rubbing it once more between your palms as you did previously. This should warm up the clarified butter, and once worked for a few minutes, the semolina will come together and form a soft pliable dough. Once this happens, add 1/4 teaspoon of salt to the bowl. The final ingredient that is going into the dough is 150 milliliters or 5 fluid ounces of orange blossom water, which is a slightly floral tasting extract. Make sure not to use rose water by accident, as I think 150 milliliters of that would be a fatal mistake. When you've added your orange blossom water to the dough, start mixing it in. Now at first it will look like a huge amount of liquid, but in an almost magical way, the water will quickly be absorbed into the semolina and the dough will grow in size. While you work it, it will suddenly start to come together and form a soft workable dough. When it no longer feels wet and you can form balls of dough in your hand, it's done mixing. Cover it once again and set it aside for 30 minutes or an hour to rest. While it's resting, we can get started on the fillings. The first 2 we'll make need a syrup to bind them, so in a saucepan add 100 grams or 3.5 ounces of sugar and turn the heat up to medium-high. Pour in 50 milliliters or 3.5 fluid ounces of room temperature water and follow that up with a squeeze of lemon juice. Give the pot a swirl so all the sugar is covered and let it come to a boil. Then swirl once more to dissolve the remaining sugar. Turn the heat down to low and let it simmer uncovered for 10 minutes until the syrup has thickened, then set it aside to cool. Once cooled completely, it is ready to use. It's also possible to use honey as a binder for the fillings, so if you prefer to use that, then you will just substitute equal amounts in place of the syrup. So the first filling we'll make is a lightly spiced walnut filling, which is reminiscent of an apple pie. To ensure we can evenly stuff our biscuits, we need to chop the walnuts into small pieces about the size of a grain of rice or two. You can do this with a kitchen knife by rocking it back and forth through the nuts until you have evenly chopped them, but this is quite time consuming and tiresome. The easier way is to use a food processor or a blender and pulse the nuts for a few minutes until they are chopped up. If you do this, don't leave it on, just switch it on and off quickly a few times, otherwise you might make nut butter by accident. This is the size you're looking to get to. Once you've done that, add the chopped nuts to a mixing bowl. Next, add the following spices to the walnuts: half a teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of mahlab, and an eighth of a teaspoon each of cloves, cardamom, and finally mace or nutmeg. Next, add in 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar and 1 tablespoon of light brown sugar. Give that a quick mix so the spices and sugar are evenly distributed, then add in 3 tablespoons of the cooled syrup, and then mix it together thoroughly. Once fully combined, the mixture should start to clump together slightly, and if you press it, it should form easily into a cluster of nuts. If not, add a little more syrup until it does this. The pistachio filling is very similar. I placed 150 grams of pistachios into my blender and pulsed them together for a few seconds until lightly chopped. Now, because of their shape and size, they are a bit harder to chop in the blender without turning them into a powder. I suggest only pulsing for a second or two before continuing the chopping with your knife. The pieces should be similar to the size of the walnut pieces. Pour it into a mixing bowl and add 3 tablespoons of sugar as well as 3 tablespoons of the syrup. Mix it all together until well combined and it clumps up just like the walnut filling. The final filling we'll make is a simple date one. Add 200 grams of date paste to a mixing bowl and add 20 grams or 3/4 of an ounce of clarified butter to the bowl. Mix the paste and butter together until all the butter is incorporated and the dates form a soft and pliable filling. Mix in 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon and then set aside. If you only have whole dates, just pick them and place them in a small pot on medium heat with the butter and mix. I made this in my Hanukkah episode, which is another kind of Eid cookie, so check it out if you need details. So with the fillings done, it's time to portion out the dough into individual biscuits. You want to measure out 20 grams or 3/4 of an ounce of dough per cookie. I have this ice cream scoop which measures out 10 grams of dough pretty accurately, so I'm using 2 scoops of this to portion out each cookie. I recommend getting one of these if you're planning on making a large amount, as it ensures you get consistently sized cookies and is useful in all sorts of baking recipes. If not, try out your measuring spoons and hopefully one of them is close to 10 or 20 grams. Once you've portioned out your dough, grab each bunch and roll it together in the palm of your hands until it forms a smooth and soft ball. Roll all your dough into balls. I was left with exactly 43 balls of dough. Once your biscuits are ready, it's traditional for them to be formed in these molds designed specifically for Maa'moul. Here's 3 different molds I have, 2 plastic and 1 wood. Each has multiple designs on it. The idea is that once baked and dusted with sugar, you should be able to tell what the filling of each cookie is by the shape of it. There are also some traditional shapes which are handmade on each biscuit using special tweezers, which I unfortunately didn't have. If you don't have a mold, you can use anything in your kitchen to make a design on the biscuits. The first Maa'moul I'll fill are the pistachio ones, which I'm going to make into this long biscuit shape. Grab a ball of dough in your hand and roll it out slightly into a short and stubby log. Then place on a work surface or in the palm of your hand. Press down in the center of the log until you have hollowed it out slightly and it looks like a small boat. Now you don't want to press too hard on it, as you still want there to be dough on the underside. Next, get about a teaspoon of the pistachio filling and compress it slightly before laying into the hollow divot you created in the biscuit, and then close the biscuit. Fold the 2 tips of the log in to cover the filling, and then press the dough on either side in and over the filling to close the biscuit. When you press the 2 sides together, it should seal easily and form a log once more. Once you can pick it up, roll it in your hand once more until smooth and the seam disappears, then compress slightly so that it can fit in the mold. Grab your mold and add the log of dough to it and press it down into the mold. You want to compress it a little so that it forms into the shape correctly, but don't press too hard as you can displace the nuts and cause the filling to mix with the dough. To get the dough out of the mold, you need to bang it hard against the edge of a cutting board or worktop. Now with these plastic molds it can be a bit hard, so what you need to do is hit it right on the joint of the shape as I did here. It may take a couple of hits, but it will pop out. As you can see, you get this beautiful definition on the biscuit from the mold. This shape in particular has nice sharp edges. Repeat this process till you have used up your filling or a third of the dough. The next ones we'll make are the walnut ones. Now these are a bit easier because we're just making them into a ball. Just place a ball of dough in your hand and make an indentation with your thumb. Add a teaspoon of the walnut filling in the centre and then pull the edges of the dough up to wrap the dough around the nuts. Pull each edge towards the centre and then press them together until a ball has formed. Once sealed, roll in the palm of your hands to smooth it out once more before placing it into one of the moulds. This time I opted for a circular mould. Once again, hit the mould right at the plastic joint where your filled mould connects with the other ones, and the biscuit should pop right out. I found hitting it against this other mould worked good, but some stacked cutting boards would work as well. Here's the shape we got out of that. Finally, we'll make the date ones. Now these are even easier to do. Just make an indentation and grab a teaspoon of the date filling. Place it in the indentation and you can just squish the rest of the dough around the date to seal up the biscuit. Roll it out into a smooth ball once more, and this time I'm placing it in my wooden mould. Because the mould is solid wood, it's a lot easier to get the biscuits out of this one. Just bang it against the cutting board at a slight angle and the biscuit will pop right out. Now because there's no leaveners in these biscuits, they won't change shape much in the oven. Evenly spread them out on a tray and admire it for a few seconds before placing in an oven preheated to 200 degrees Celsius or 390 Fahrenheit for 12 minutes. After 6 minutes in the oven, rotate the tray to ensure they get evenly baked. Now my doorbell rang just before I got this tray out of the oven, so they stayed in for 2 extra minutes, but I still thought I would show you how they looked. They are golden tinged and browned on the bottom. You want to take yours out before they reach this stage, but if they do bake a little longer they will still be fine. This one here was from a batch I made earlier without letting the clarified butter cool completely, and it also had a little bit less orange blossom water. As you can see, the edges on this biscuit are nowhere near as well defined as on this second batch. This one is one that was perfectly cooked for exactly 12 minutes. As you can see, it is very similar, except it's a lighter golden colour and less browned on the underside. You should aim to replicate this. Let your biscuits cool for 15 to 30 minutes before lightly dusting them with some powdered sugar. Now these biscuits don't have much sweetener in them, as there's only a few tablespoons across the 43 cookies, so don't skip this sugar. I found that generously dusting them with sugar and letting them sit for a full day before serving results in a better texture and flavour overall. I highly recommend letting them sit for at least 6 hours so the biscuit can rehydrate, as it can be quite dry when it first comes out of the oven. I've plated up an assortment of the biscuits and I'm serving them alongside a cup of delicious Turkish coffee. Now I haven't mastered it yet, but this bitter jet fuel is the perfect accompaniment to these biscuits. I'm going to start off with the date one, and you can see it has held its shape well. The date ones are usually made really flat, but it worked out great like this. As you can see, there's a generous amount of the filling in these cookies, and the light cinnamon flavour is delicious. Next up is the walnut one. Once again, these held their shape beautifully, and they have such a lovely spiced flavour. The cinnamon, nutmeg and brown sugar remind me of apple pie, but the mahlab and cardamom take it to the next level. Finally, we have the pistachio filled one, which we made into this long log shape. The pistachios are moist and lightly sweetened and taste perfect with the biscuit itself. Of course, I have to have a sip of this fantastic Turkish coffee. And here's all 3 different flavours side by side. All delicious, all generously filled, and a great treat. I hope you enjoyed the recipe and will consider making these. It really doesn't require any special equipment and it's not difficult to do. Most of the ingredients are readily available and I'm sure you'll love them if you try. Make some and give them to a friend or neighbour, and make sure to send me some photos on Instagram. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe, as it really helps recommend the video to other people. If you want me to cover any specific recipes, leave a comment down below. As usual, all the ingredients and directions are in the description box, and I'll be back next week with another recipe.